this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now. You call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose? Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year. You can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Why have we asked our contractor we found on Angie.com to be our kids' legal guardian? Because he took such good care when redoing our basement that we knew we could trust him to care for our kids, all 8 of them, should something happen to us.
Are you my dad now?
No, sorry, I do basements.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Did you know that parents rank teaching financial literacy as the toughest life skill? That's where Greenlight comes in, the debit card and money app made for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and track spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn how to earn, save, and spend responsibly, while parents have peace of mind, knowing smart money habits are being built with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/iHeart. That's greenlight.com/iHeart.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. You know, there are a lot of terms that people use for tiny rural towns. I've heard them all at this point in my life. One that comes to mind is flea speck of a town. That means tiny, out of the way, forgotten. But you know, for the people that live in these tiny little towns, it's home. And there's a sense of security many times. That's what kind of separates Ocilla, Georgia from many other locations. Folks felt secure. They felt safe. That is until 2005, when Tara Grinstead vanished off the face of the planet. Today, we're going to talk about the disappearance and the destruction of the remains of Tara Grinstead. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. My good buddy Jackie Howard, executive producer of Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, is here with me. Jackie, what can you tell us about Tara Grinstead?
Oh, this is a case that captivated America because this beloved teacher and former beauty queen truly seemed to disappear off of the face of the earth. Tara Grinstead was a teacher. She taught history. And as I said, she was a former beauty queen. She was just 30 years old when she went missing after an evening with friends and coworkers. She had been earlier in the day working with pageant participants. And then she attended a bonfire, a cookout with fellow teachers. Witnesses at the cookout said Tara left early and went home. Tara had plans the next day. When the next day rolled around, no Tara. Her mother and best friend thought something came up. They weren't really worried about it at that time because this was before cell phone use that we see today. On Monday, when Tara did not show up for work, a missing person report was made by her neighbors and her coworkers. Police are called in, and that's where our timeline and investigations start, Joe. When police go into the house, they don't find a body, and the investigation begins. Let's talk about the beginnings of an investigation. What did the police do when they got there to determine what happened to Tara?
Well, it's almost rote now, in the genre of true crime where you hear what we talk about when investigators show up at the scene, Jackie. They'll say there's no signs of forced entry or struggle. And that is true. That's one of the things that you look for. And plus, let's go back a little bit and think about when Tara did disappear, because this case from the beginning was treated as a disappearance. It was not treated necessarily as some kind of horrific event like a homicide had taken place. So what they're trying to determine, the big question before them at that moment in time is, where is this woman? And reflectively, you think about what her friends are seeing, her kinfolks, and they're talking about this is completely out of the norm for her. That it's not standard practice for her. When she didn't show up for work on that Monday, that was a big red flag for the folks that work with her, because, she's not going to just disappear. Maybe she would call off sick if she were in fact sick, but it's not like her not to show up for work. She's a public school teacher, who's going to cover the class. There's a lot that goes into that, So people were really concerned about her whereabouts, but I think that it's even within human nature. The first thing that your mind goes to is generally not, has she been murdered? It's, where is she? And it didn't fit with what they were seeing at the scene, because there was really no sign of forced entry in the house. I think adjacent to her bed, there's a bedside lamp that's slightly askew. You've got a candle that's overturned. The phone, which is a cordless phone, was found on the floor. But it's not like you go through and you've got broken furniture everywhere and there's a sign of struggle. And also there's a sign of people rifling, or a person having rifled through all of her personal belongings. And, the biggest thing is there's nothing missing at that point in time, valuables and that sort of thing. It was even noted that there was still costume jewelry laying about that someone would use in a pageant performance. So nothing had been taken from the residence at this point in time. Tara just appears to have, kind of vaporized into thin air, and no one knew what exactly had happened to her.
So, Joe, as this missing person case got underway, as you were saying, nothing was really missing from the home. It did not appear to be a robbery. So at that point, it makes you consider the fact that Tara has been taken. Her car is still in her driveway. It's a little muddy on the outside. Her house was locked when the police got there. And the only items that appear to be missing are her purse and her keys. Yet again, her car was still in the driveway. Police did find, however, that the seat had been moved. What does that tell us?
If you look at a vehicle, listen, we all understand, everybody can identify with getting into your own personal vehicle. And someone having been in there, say they were shorter than you, and they've adjusted the seat, moved it forward, you're going to understand that. And people would know, just from observations of Tara, they're going to know what her height is. Okay. And so when you try to factor that in, if you're a police officer and you're looking, well, this seems a bit long-legged, if you would, for someone of Tara's stature to be driving this vehicle. It seems incompatible with her size. It gives you an indication, at least, that maybe somebody else had been utilizing the vehicle at that point in time. But, here's one of the big problems with that vehicle. The fact is that vehicle was not thoroughly examined. It just wasn't. And I look at vehicles as what we refer to many times as secondary scenes, because they're like this bubble that contains many times a wealth of evidence, and even more so than, say, a home, for instance, because you don't have a lot of people passing through the area. It's kind of self-contained. It turned out later that, I think that the neighbor had taken Tara's vehicle and had it detailed. Now, just imagine that, and I guess that it was out of goodwill. Tara was missing at the time. They took the vehicle and had it cleaned for her thoroughly and had it brought back to her home. And so by the time that the crime scene investigators actually made it to her car in order to inspect it, to check it out even further, maybe give it the once over, anything that had been in there was gone. Because, when cars get detailed, you use things like solvents inside of them. You wipe things down, you vacuum things. So any kind of evidence that's there is going to be greatly compromised at that point in time, not to mention the individuals that are entering the vehicle to clean it are leaving behind traces of themselves. Okay, say for instance, you've got a guy that is vacuuming, okay, the carpet inside of Tara's vehicle. Well, you don't know, but if he's been detailing 3 and 4 other cars that same day, he's going to drag all of that particulate evidence from those other vehicles he's been in and the world in which he inhabits into her vehicle and deposit it there. Now, just imagine, you can begin to kind of do the calculus on this, and you understand why anything that might be found in there is going to essentially be kind of invalid from an evidentiary standpoint, because this goes to cross-contamination, and it goes back to what was said over a century ago by Edmond Lecard. And that is, every contact leaves a trace. So that's one of the defining principles in forensics that we work under. So, what you're saying is you're introducing yourself into the environment, even as a crime scene investigator. But so much more for somebody that's going in and cleaning. They're essentially wiping away all evidence. You're not going to have anything that is going to be usable within this vehicle. So if this vehicle was used, say, for instance, to transport Tara, if there was blood evidence in there, if there was any kind of other bodily fluids that were in there, there's a good chance they would be greatly compromised. And even more so, you would expect to find her DNA in the vehicle because she operates the vehicle. But what if you're looking for that one person that essentially has no contact with her whatsoever in her normal workaday life, and their evidence may have been deposited in that vehicle? Well, it's gone now, because now it's been cleaned, and all of that is eradicated.
I'm sure most of our listeners, Joe, when you talk about this car being detailed, it raised so many red flags, because number one, what neighbor has the keys to somebody else's car and just does this? To me, this is like, wait a minute. You're going to take my car and clean it without telling me you're going to take my car and clean it? And when you couldn't tell me you were going to take my car and clean it, that didn't raise any red flags for this person?
Yeah, and I think, again, you got a couple of things at work here. First off, you've got a community that's just wringing its hands and grieving. Okay, you've got people that want to extend goodwill and help out. Remember, Ocilla is just a tiny little town out in rural South Georgia. Stuff like this just doesn't happen. I mean, it just does not happen. So people are kind of working through this thing, trying to do something for people, just trying to, soothe themselves and maybe soothe other members of her family, or just make up some, let me rephrase that, just kind of offer up something that they can do as a gesture of kindness. And I think that probably that was the motivation behind here. Now, you can look at it from a more skeptical view and say, well, would this person, and I'd certainly look at it this way as an investigator if I was the one on the ground, did this person have some kind of nefarious reason for doing this? Or were they trying to cover tracks at this point in time? And I don't think that really led anywhere as far as the police were concerned. But at the end, this falls squarely on the shoulders of law enforcement. Okay, because it doesn't rest on the neighbor who did this act of, being a good Samaritan. This rests, from Jump Street. That car should have been impounded at that moment in time. We've already talked about how the seat was adjusted. All right, that it seemed askew or out of the normal. It was at that point in time, you got this missing person that just, it's outside of her normal behavior. That car should have been taken by the police at that moment in time and sequestered somewhere so that no one else had access to it. And I think that if that had occurred, looking back at this retrospectively, there would be far fewer questions and a lot more answers, I think.
One of the other pieces of evidence that came from the home actually came from outside the home. Police found a latex glove. Now, today, with all of our knowledge about forensics, we would think, or you would think, that finding that latex glove outside the home would have been a game changer for this investigation. But that ended up not being the case, Joe.
You got a couple of folks that had borne witness to that glove. Famously, the next door neighbor, elderly gentleman, had come over to look for Tara at that point in time. And that gentleman, who was up in age, had stated that he saw a latex glove on the ground in the yard at Tara's home. And, we're thinking about, this is back in 2005. And so we had not quite gotten to the point from a technology standpoint where we were going to use touch DNA. However, what is significant, I think, in this particular case is that the analyst that examined the glove did an external sampling on the outside of the glove, okay, and also within the glove. So you're talking about swabbing all the surfaces because you don't know what you're going to get. And as it turned out, they were able to develop a couple of profiles off of what they had recovered from the glove. And keep in mind, again, this is prior to the days of us actually having touch DNA. And just so our listeners understand and remember, touch DNA comes about as a result of deposition of essentially dead cells, like dead skin cells. We slough thousands and thousands of these per day. You're not aware of it. Lord knows, lotion companies have made tons of money off of dry skin treatments. All right. Well, the reason is that we slough skin cells, and in those skin cells, there are particulate pieces of DNA that we can essentially replicate, make a profile off of. Back in 2005, we weren't quite there yet. Most of the DNA sampling back then required some kind of bodily fluid. You're thinking about blood, you're thinking about semen, saliva, those sorts of things, wet samples, if you will. And as we move forward in time, now we're beginning to be able to take fragmentary DNA and create this, this kind of replicant DNA pattern and develop a profile off of that. So going back, this was very significant that she had taken samples off of both aspects of the glove, both the interior and the exterior. And, at the end, I think that it's important because if if that had not been done, then you would still have many questions that have since been answered relative to who was involved in Tara's disappearance.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Hi, I'm Cindy Crawford, and I'm the founder of Meaningful Beauty. When Dr. Sabah and I decided to do a skincare line together, he said to me, "We are going to give women meaningful beauty." And I said, "That's exactly right. We want to give women meaningful beauty, which means each and every product is meaningful. It has a reason to exist. It's efficacious. You're going to get results. And then you just go out and live your life."
Meaningful Beauty. Confidence is beautiful. Learn more at meaningfulbeauty.com.
Why have I asked my electrician I found on Angie.com to bury my pet hamster Nibbles in our yard for me? Because I was so moved by how carefully he buried my electrical wires, I knew I could trust him to bury my sweet Nibbles after his untimely end. Nibbles, gone too soon. May he scurry in peace.
Hey, sorry about your pet, but I just wire stuff.
Nibbles would have loved you like a brother.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Well, the holidays have come and gone once again, but if you've forgotten to get that special someone in your life a gift, well, Mint Mobile is extending their holiday offer of half off unlimited wireless. So here's the idea. You get it now. You call it an early present for next year. What do you have to lose?
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Limited time 50% off regular price for new customers. Upfront payment required. $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12-month plan. Taxes and fees extra. Speeds may slow after 50 gigabytes per month when network is busy. See terms.
You know, and like children that disappear, you're not going to have a bunch of alerts that go up when an adult disappears. And that was one of the problems that existed in Tara's case from Jump Street. Is she's 30 years old. She's a creature of free will. She can make a decision to go and disappear or go somewhere else, and she doesn't have to report to anybody. And that was the problem all along with this case, Jackie.
It was, Joe, the level of disinformation, for lack of a better way to put it, between state agents and local authorities really boggled down this investigation. It was more than 10 years before an arrest was made in this case. But what we find is that the arrest in this case of Ryan Duke and Bo Dukes was a long time in coming. Investigators said that this pair was on their radar early in the investigation. Information came to the agents about the investigation, but they didn't follow up. The information that was relayed to them appeared as if this pair had been cleared by local authorities. That never happened. They weren't cleared by local authorities. They weren't cleared by state authorities. Ryan Duke and Bo Duke were former students of Tara Grinstead. Remember, she was a history teacher. So how did that fall through the cracks, Joe?
Sometimes these things happen that way. Remember when Tara first vanished, you had the locals that were the first responders on the scene. This would be, the Ocilla police department that had showed up, and they're kind of the initial point of contact. And one of the problems that happens is that you lose information. When you have an assisting agency that comes in this case, it was the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. And most of the time, because people might not understand how this happens, the GBI and most state investigative agencies, they don't come into a local investigation of their own free will, if you will. They have to be summoned or requested to come in. And I think early on, the Ocilla PD saw that there was a need to have someone that had greater resources. So they invited the GBI to come in. And of course, this is after the fact. When you've got essentially two investigations going on, the assumption, I think, by the GBI was that the Ocilla Police Department had already cleared this pair. You've got Bo Dukes, and that's with an S, and it's kind of confusing. And then you have Ryan Duke, and these guys are friends, but they're not related anyway. As a matter of fact, the names are completely different. One is D-U-K-E and the other is D-U-K-E-S. But they were friends, and they were on the radar, according to the GBI, but their assumption was these two had been cleared by the Ocilla Police Department, so they didn't pursue the lead. The one thing that kind of turned this entire case was the fact that Bo Dukes, who arguably has a very troubled past, he'd been in the military, he had served time in federal prison for, I think it was like $150,000 in theft from the federal government while he was in the military, served time in federal prison. He had been accused of some really bad things in other cases. One case in particular was a rape case, which he was indicted for. But he had, kind of slipped under the radar. And that in and of itself was crushing to the investigation early on. I think that there may have been answers that were gleaned far sooner had they had an eye on these pair.
So what ultimately became the big break in this case, Joe?
Well, I think that the genesis of it came as a result of Bo Dukes imbibing, drinking, and then running his mouth. And he began to, kind of hold forth on how he had been involved in the disappearance of Tara Grinstead. And there were a couple of people along the way that he had mentioned this to, namely an old Army buddy of his, who he had stated plainly to him that he had a hand in Tara's disappearance. A fellow had come in to visit Duke's family at Christmas time during the holidays, and he had been invited in. He'd mentioned it to him then, and then he had mentioned to a couple of other folks as well that he had information relative to Tara, and connection was never really made early on by the police to this. And finally, folks came forward and actually connected the two. And when Bo Dukes was finally arrested, he made a confession at that point in time, kind of laid out exactly what had happened. And to say the very least, it was very, very chilling, kind of the scenario that he laid out, what happened on that fateful night and the following days back in 2005.
Ultimately, Joe, Ryan Duke is charged with 5 counts: burglary, aggravated assault, malice murder, felony murder, and concealing a death. Bo Dukes is charged with helping him to dispose of the body. What did we find out that happened to her, Joe, in this testimony? We know that Ryan Duke gained access to the home using a credit card, which is why we saw no signs of forced entry.
Right.
But when it comes to her death, what do we know?
Yeah. Bo Dukes made a couple of statements relative to what had been related to him allegedly by Ryan Duke. And this is kind of how it lays out from what Bo Dukes had stated. He stated that he was told by Ryan that he had entered the house using a credit card, and he was able to jimmy the lock essentially. And this can be easily done. And when this is done, you're talking about taking a plastic credit card and applying it to a door jamb that's not very secure, and kind of slipping it into the notch there where actually the locking mechanism meets the door jamb itself, and you can disengage the lock and quietly gain entrance into the house. So there's no forcing, there's no kicking, there's no prying of the door. So you're not going to have things like tool marks, So when the cops would look at that, they'd be scratching their head saying, well, we don't have any signs of forced entry here. No one has forced this door open, because it's not going to leave any evidence behind. And then Bo went on to say that Ryan related to him that he had climbed into the bed with Tara and strangled her. And, I've over the course of my career, I've worked quite a few strangulations and people that are in kind of asymmetrical positions where you've got the dominant individual, the attacker, who is in fact dominant. That's that asymmetry. And now you're talking about a grown man that is hovering over a slightly built woman lying in her bed. Why did he feel the need to climb into the bed with her? And the fact that he stated that he climbed into the bed with her implies something else. To me, it does, at least, as an investigator. That gives it almost an air of some kind of there's a sexual element there, to me, to my way of thinking. And then he strangles her. And in the meantime, Bo has stated that that Ryan had acquired Bo's truck because Bo was drunk the night that this occurred and had passed out. Ryan goes back, gets Ryan's truck, places Tara's body into the truck, and takes her body off some distance to a pecan orchard that he was very familiar with, and essentially dumps this woman's body out in a debris area there on this property at Pecan Orchard. And all of this is being related by Bo Duke, who, agreed for whatever reason to go with Ryan out to this location and to verify, to help him. It kind of remained unclear until Bo finally said, yeah, he agreed to help Ryan dispose of Tara Grinstead's body. Now, here's the key thing, going back to what I'd stated about the bed and him climbing into the bed with her. When Bo first observed Tara's body, he made several observations in this. The most glaring, I think, is the fact that he stated that her body was nude. Well, as investigators, when we look at a crime scene and we see a female, well, for any person in particular, but when you're investigating deaths like this and you see the body of a female that is nude, that has heavy sexual overtones. Assuming that Tara Grinstead did not sleep nude, that she wore some type of bed clothing, like pajamas or, gym shorts or something to bed. Why were her clothes removed from her body? It just, that's a big question. Then he stated that her body was discolored. And I think that probably what he was observing at that point in time was the fact that she had already started to go into decompositional changes, and the body during this period of time will take on kind of a dark color as the body becomes progressively more dehydrated. This is a process of desiccation, if you will. And then one other thing, kind of the final thing here. He stated that she had what appeared to be marks on her neck, or injuries to her neck, and this goes back as a confirmation based upon what Ryan had allegedly stated to Bo, that he had gotten into the bed with her and strangled her. Strangulation is a very intimate event. It's probably, from commission of a homicide, is probably the most intimate, because you are placing flesh on flesh at that moment in time. It's not like beating somebody. It's not like stabbing somebody. It's certainly not like shooting somebody. You're literally placing your hands on this person, flesh on flesh, and squeezing the life out of them. You're in a dominant position over them. And so for that, he is the only essentially linkage back to physical evidence, or, well, let's don't say physical evidence, but he is the only source at this point in time that we have for what actually happened to Tara, because after that, he begins to assist with the destruction of her remains and the concealment of her death.
Tara's body was cremated by this pair, Joe. We know this because that's what they have admitted to in court. Taking the body to the pecan orchard, and as we have discussed before on body bags, we know that it takes a long time, that it takes a high temperature to cremate a body. What does it tell us, Joe, that they took Tara's body to this area to burn it, to get rid of the evidence of their crime?
There's one other element here relative to fire. What else do you need? You need concealment. And I'm not just talking about just kind of, doing things in a dark space. I'm talking about you need an out of the way place. You need a place that is not going to draw attention, some place that's off the beaten path. And that gives you an idea that whoever did this, Bo is certainly taking responsibility for his participation in this. You would have to have an awareness, wouldn't you? You'd have to have an awareness of where you could go in order to facilitate this, because there's all kinds of things that you're going to need in order to set this up. Concealment is the biggest thing, so that you're not going to draw attention, because, as you mentioned, this is not something that happens in a flash. This is something that takes a tremendous amount of time, but not just time. It takes attention, Jack.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Hi, I'm Cindy Crawford, and I'm the founder of Meaningful Beauty. When Dr. Sabah and I decided to do a skincare line together, he said to me, we are going to give women meaningful beauty. And I said, that's exactly right. We want to give women meaningful beauty, which means each and every product is meaningful. It has a reason to exist. It's efficacious. You're going to get results. And then you just go out and live your life.
Meaningful Beauty. Confidence is beautiful. Learn more at meaningfulbeauty.com.
Why have we asked our contractor we found on Angie.com to be our kids' legal guardian? Because he took such good care when redoing our basement that we knew we could trust him to care for our kids, all 8 of them, should something happen to us.
Are you my dad now?
No, sorry, I do basements.
Connecting homeowners with skilled pros for over 30 years. Angie, the one you trust to find the ones you trust. Find pros for all your home projects at Angie.com.
Are you a fraud-paying American? It's a fact that 1 in 4 honest, hard-working, tax-paying Americans has been a victim of identity theft. With LifeLock Identity Theft Protection, though, if your identity is stolen, they fix it, guaranteed, and get you your money back. Last year, the IRS flagged over $16 billion in refunds for identity fraud. That's billions of dollars that could come from your salary, overtime, or second job. But this year, you don't need to stay a victim. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second for your personal information and alerts you to threats you could easily miss on your own. And if your information does fall into the wrong hands, only LifeLock has U.S.-based restoration specialists who are backed by the $1 Million Protection Package. Because this tax season, fraud-paying American is something no American should have to claim. Visit LifeLock.com/iHeart and save up to 40% your first year. That's 40% off at LifeLock.com/iHeart. Terms apply.
There's an attempt, I think, with Tara's death of what I refer to as dehumanization, where you take this beautiful, vital young lady that loved folks, loved her family, and you just absolutely rip her to shreds. And then, it's kind of the exclamation point on it. You reduce her down to absolutely nothing, down to her base elements as a human being.
As we were just talking about, Joe, it takes a long time to cremate a body. Before we get to that, let's start with how they found what was left of the body, because there wasn't much left, was there?
No, there wasn't. And the investigators were actually led out to the scene by Duke. And when they got there, there was still an approximation of the area where the cremation had taken place. And keep in mind, we're years down the road, from where this actually happened. The thing about burning wood and these organic substances is that it changes the nature of the soil. It changes the nature of the plant growth that's in the area. As a matter of fact, it'll kind of enrich the soil, if you will, relative to the remnant of the fire. So what we refer to as the topography and also the taphonomy. Taphonomy is a term that's used in forensic anthropology, and it goes to the distribution of remains, skeletal remains in particular, or cremated remains, in regards to the topography and how water impacts it, and how plant growth and all these things affect what you're looking at as an investigator. And so when you go out, you're relying on information coming from an individual that has perpetrated this horrible deed. And basing your investigation upon that. At least that's the point of where you kind of start the investigation, the physical investigation at the scene, and begin to process it. And at first, I can only imagine the investigators being out there and, kind of scratching their head and thinking, well, how exactly are we going to start off here? How are we going to begin to try to put together what exactly happened? Are we going to be able to establish some kind of boundaries for where this cremation took place? And it's a daunting task, to say the very least.
As police started the investigation in that orchard, they found bone fragments. They found pieces of her backbone, bone fragments of her fingers and toes, and some of her skull. How did they find that, Joe?
They found remains of what would have been referred to as the small bones of the hand. But what stands out to me the most are these three elements: the fact that they found some of the skull, some of the spinal processes, which are the vertebral bodies, and also they found a single tooth. Now, when you take all of that in its totality, aside from the hand bones, when you begin to think about the spine, the skull, and the tooth, those are arguably some of the most robust elements of the body. That means that they will last even in the face of a fire far longer than some of the other elements that will be essentially disintegrated as a result of exposure to prolonged exposure to heat. And it's not necessarily surprising that they were able to find the vertebral body and part of the skull and the tooth. And I like for the listeners to understand, and you might think this is kind of an obvious statement, but teeth are, arguably some of the most resilient elements of the human body, and they are not bone. They are not bone. But it's key here, Jackie, to understand that they found not teeth, but a tooth.
A tooth. Why is that significant, Joe?
Well, the fact is that it is a tooth, not the teeth. That gives you an idea as to how hot this fire was, because in the process of cremation or rendering down remains through heat, teeth will last longer than just about any other element in the human body. And let's say, for instance, you have a body, and we can kind of explain, maybe, and I'll take a stab at it, we can kind of explain why, say, some of the spinal processes might have been found or part of the skull. And if you would imagine somebody laying in a supine position or face up, those areas that are on the backside are going to be protected. So if you've got a shot at any element surviving, it's going to be those that are protected, say, they're making contact with the dirt. I suspect that probably if she had been in an attitude, a supine attitude, which is face up, lying on her back, then maybe that portion of the skull that was recovered would have been one of the more robust areas of the skull. And that there's two areas that are particularly very, very dense, and that's going to be the frontal bone, which is where your forehead is, and the back of your head, the occipital region, which is that kind of bony prominence that you have on the back of your skull. The areas of the skull are very, very thick in those locations. And then, the vertebral bodies, if she's in a supine position, are going to be more resistant, I think, to exposure to heat. And they are, in and of themselves, as far as bone goes, they are more resilient. They're very thick, kind of robust. And then, of course, you have this tooth that is left behind. And teeth are highly heat resistant for a protracted period of time. They'll last longer. And that's one of the reasons when you have an actual cremation that's done in a crematory, most of the time, the remains, those remains that have been rendered down will come out of a conveyor belt, and they will pass through an auger, which is this kind of giant screw, and it further renders down the remains by crushing. Because when those remains are turned to family, it's essentially dust that's left behind. But there's still those elements that are so robust that they have to be, kind of rendered down further. That's not the case with Tara's remains. Not everything was completely rendered down, but they came very, very close, Jackie. Very close.
Okay, I'm going to sound really intelligent here, Joe. You're going to be really proud of me. Done some research.
Yeah.
And we know that bone is made up of protein collagen. Okay. Mm-hmm. Teeth are made of enamel and calcium.
Right.
Teeth can be destroyed by sugar, by decay.
Right.
Bone cannot.
Right.
So you're telling me that fire is not as damaging as sugar to a tooth? I mean, what I'm trying to understand is if we have this substance in our body that is as hard or maybe harder than our bones, how can we end up with this result?
Yeah. That's actually a very intriguing question, Jackie. You're talking about a physiological reaction, the teeth, to exposure, long-term exposure to something like a sugar, and more people are susceptible to it than others. As far as decay, dental decay goes. But, we're talking about two different types of chemical reactions here. Fire, in fact, is a chemical reaction. It's a sustained chemical reaction. There's several elements that are involved in it, and it happens in a very short order. And because of the density and the structure of the teeth, they are heat resistant. When exposed, even long-term exposure to heat, when bodies are being rendered down. Bone, not so much. It's not made that way. The matrices of the bone begins to break down, and it's fascinating because one of the ways that forensic anthropologists will verify in court, for instance, that bone has been exposed to fire. One of the things that they will actually say, Jackie, is that it weighs less. And isn't that a fascinating observation? Because as bone is exposed to heat, it begins to bleed off these various elements, including things like water. The collagen is burned away so that all you're left with is essentially the bone becomes calcific, and it takes on a white appearance, and you can look at it. It's got kind of a honeycomb formation. That's kind of the matrices, the bones that you can see exposed. And so the longer exposed to heat, the lighter the bone becomes. And that's one of the scientific ways and legal ways that you verify if a bone has been exposed to heat. And I've heard many times that forensic anthropologists, when asked that question under direct, how do you know that this body was burned based upon the skeletal remains that you examine? And that's one of the things they'll say: the bone is lighter. Teeth are not necessarily going to lose that weight. They won't lose it as quickly because they act as kind of like a shield. And one of the things I teach my students when it comes to DNA, for instance, if you imagine, we can extract DNA from bone, but you can also get it from teeth. You go into the pulp of the tooth, and teeth are much more resilient. They can hold on to things a lot longer. You look at, remains that have been in the ground for years and years. You can do a DNA extraction on those remains. And I tell them that bone is like a leather briefcase and for retaining things, but teeth are like a titanium briefcase. They're more resilient. They hang on to things longer. And in this case, in Tara's case in particular, they found this single tooth. And the fact that they found a single tooth means that they weren't at least able to identify the other teeth, or the teeth were so affected by the level of heat that this body was exposed to that they became rendered down until, out of the 32, there was only one remaining.
Okay, so let's talk about how they managed to cremate this body so that there's very little remaining. They are in a pecan orchard. So you would imagine, since they're planning to start a fire, they're going to use what they easily have on hand, which is pecan wood.
Yep. Yeah.
What do we know?
Yeah, pecan's an interesting wood. It's a hardwood, and it's comparable actually to hickory. And wood is ranked as far as like its ability to burn things or to maintain heat, as it's rated as one of the highest. It's rated as a wood that can produce the most heat. All right, hickory, it's in the same family as hickory. The only level above pecan is oak. All right. So if you're going to choose a wood to generate heat with, pecan's a good choice. And obviously, as you well stated, that that's a fuel source that you would have access to. The thing about pecan orchards is that many times, and we have them all over the South, limbs fall away. If people are tending their pecan orchards, what they will do is they'll grab that wood and they'll create these kind of debris piles. Okay. And so you've got wood that's not just laying there and is available to use as a fuel source, but it's seasoned wood, Jackie, which means that it burns even better after it's been laying out for a while and exposure to the elements. It's no longer vital. It's not green. It's not going to smoke a lot. It's just, you're going to get right to the point with it. If you can get this thing ignited and set off, you're going to have a really hot fire. And to give you an idea as to how hot pecan wood burns is quite notable. And for folks that don't know, heat is measured in many times in BTUs. It's a British thermal unit, and that's just so folks understand. A BTU, a British thermal unit, equates to the amount of heat that it takes to raise 1 pound, and yes, I said pound, of water 1 degree Fahrenheit. And if you look at pecan wood, and just hold on to your hat here, if you look at pecan wood, if you take a cord of wood, and that's the standard measure for firewood, which is, some people, particularly down here in the South, they say I got a whole truckload of wood, and many times it's they're saying that they mean a cord, and a cord turns out to be about 128 cubic feet of wood. 128 cubic feet of pecan wood will generate right about 28 million BTUs. Now, keep that in mind by what I just said. So it will take 1 BTU raises the temperature of 1 pound of water 1 degree Fahrenheit. So it's not necessarily how hot it was at one particular time relative to the disposal of Tara's remains. It's the protracted time. It's the piling on of wood. It's creating a pyre, if you will. A pyre is something that is created, an underpinning of wood, where you have this fuel source. You lay a body on top of a pyre, and then you continue to put fuel onto it. It's the continued exposure. So out of all of the woods that could have been chosen, pecan is the one that's going to generate the most heat. It's going to create an environment that is going to be very, very hostile to a body, that will cause it at an elemental level to literally become disintegrated. But it requires constant attention. And, when Bo Dukes talks about what he claims that he did in assisting Ryan Duke, he actually stated that it took them about 2 days to render down Tara's remains. And what does that mean? Well, this goes to the tending of fire. It's not, and this is part of the dehumanization factor when it comes to Tara. It's not like you poured an accelerant like gasoline, like you see arsonists do many times, and strike a match and walk off, and everything people have this perception everything disappears. It doesn't. Matter of fact, you create more evidence when you do that. They stood out there for a protracted period of time, according to Bo, for 2 days, and tended the fire. So what went into that? Well, anytime the fire started to die down, they'd go get more wood and pile it on. Anytime that the flame reduced, they would turn the fire so that they would turn the coals over. And the entire time, and this is quite gruesome, but the entire time, there lay what remained of Tara, and they're constantly adding more fuel to this area surrounding her body, and they're trying to render her down further and further and further until, at least in their perception, everything was gone, but they missed a few elements. And at the end, that's how they were able to presumptively determine that this was, in fact, Tara Grinstead's remains.
How does what you described with the BTUs of the pecan wood compare to a crematory?
And again, I think this is a big part of this. With a crematory, you have a contained oven. That is, it's got 4 walls, man. It's a box. It's like a big metal box that you're putting a human remain on, essentially a conveyor belt. And it goes in, and these metal doors shut, and you've got these little jets that are in there that are fueled by natural gas, and it's a constant natural gas source. And it's not just the direct burning of the flame, it is the heat within the oven that creates this kind of convex, this heat convection that's going on in this environment. The heat is whipping around the remains, and so it's not just direct burning. It's the air itself is so hot, and so you're talking about a constant burning, roughly, and it's variable. You'll hear people say, 13 to 1500 degrees of exposure, in a crematory is going to render down a body. Well, a lot of that's dependent upon the body that you're burning, the mass, and how long will it take and how much heat is required and all that sort of thing. When you look at Tara's body, though, this was not a contained area. This is an open air area. So you look at this factor that's brought into this. And again, this goes back to what had to happen at the hand of Bo Dukes, and according to him, at the hand of Ryan Duke. They had to stand there and maintain this heat because they don't have a cap on this. They're losing heat as a result of applying this firewood or this pecan wood to be burned as fuel. A lot of it is disappearing up into the air. So that's why they're always having to turn the fire and add fuel, turn the fire and add fuel. And when I say turn the fire, if you've ever seen a campfire, you'll notice those coals, they glow red hot, but they don't glow red hot forever and ever, amen, because there is not a sustaining fuel source. They will eventually burn out. They were aware of this. They knew this. They knew that they had to continue to apply heat because they're bleeding off heat all along because it's outdoors. It's not like it's in a crematory. This would have been long, dirty work. They would have had to sat there for a protracted period of time, searching out firewood. If they didn't come prepared for it, they had to go drag it from other brush piles, perhaps. Maybe they cut wood. I don't know. But I do know this. They applied enough heat and constant heat, according to Bo Dukes, that it took them 2 days to eventually render down her body.
So this takes us back, Joe, to the search for what remained. You've basically got regrowth of the area. You're going to have ash in the soil. I would assume that remains. How did the investigators find the bone fragment and the tooth?
You've got individuals that are directing you to the area in which they perpetrated that. That's your source of information, if you can imagine this. So once the team, the crime scene investigative team, would have shown up out there, there's a high likelihood that they would call in a forensic anthropologist to show up at the scene as well. Because the forensic anthropologists, they have a skill set that is not possessed by very many other people. They spend all of their time looking at things that we, just as workaday people walking along about our lives, their worldview of things on the ground and as they see things is completely different than the way we see them. They can pick up on fine detail. That's what they're trained to do. So when they have identified a specific area, the forensic anthropologist will go back and essentially attempt through their knowledge to validate the information that's coming to the police vis-a-vis Bo Dukes. Is this a potential area where something like this could have happened? Well, what do they look at? They look at the distribution of any kind of debris on the ground. They try to determine if that's new debris, if that's like broken wood that may have just recently fallen or fallen within the last half decade. Or is there something else that's different about the soil? Because they also have to be in tune to things like local soil. Down in South Georgia, for instance, you've got soil that's very sandy. Whereas if you go up to, like the North Georgia mountains, that soil is completely different in that region of the state. So they have to be very attuned to the type of soil that is native to that particular area. Then they're going to have to understand something about plant life too. Understand, what they're looking at, the items that are growing there, because, lots of times when people try to cover up crimes like this, they'll go in and they will plant things. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's the case here, but they would go back, and that's just the general assessment they're going to do in the beginning. Is there any type of what we call flora? You have flora, which talks about plant life, and you have fauna, which talks about animal life. Is the flora that I'm seeing here, is it native to this area? Is this something that was brought in and kind of implanted into this area to give it a different appearance? They're going to want to know if the soil has been recently upturned, or does it look like it's settled and has been this way forever and ever? Amen. And then they're going to look for items that may give them an indication that something has happened here, even in the distant past, because they can look at a wood shard that you and I could look at, and it might not mean anything to us, but they can look at the edges of the wood to see if, in fact, this is indicative of something that may have been exposed to high heat. Once they've identified this area, they're going to break it down into grids. And we, in crime scene investigation, we talk about things like grid searches and all these sorts of things, where we break down specific areas. But for them, this is going to be more in a more condensed area. So they'll break it down into grids. If you just imagine, say, across the top of the grid, you've got, A through M, okay, A through M, and then running down one side, you might have, 1 through, 17. And if you go to block B5, you're going to excavate block B5 specifically and nothing else. And you're going to take out every layer of soil, remove it from there, and take it over to what's called a sifting station. And you've seen these big sifters that people use where they'll shake it back and forth, and the debris will fall through the screen, or the loose dirt will fall. And everything that's left in the screen is going to be examined by the forensic anthropologist to see if there's any skeletal remnant that's in there. And they can begin to kind of read through that and understand what they're seeing. And what's important, the reason you want to grid it off is when you go back and you're trying to explain this in court, you can give an indication as to where that specific item was recovered from. And suddenly, if you get it in, B5, and then of course in C5 and so forth and so on, D5, or, in close proximity, you can begin to see how maybe a body will begin to kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of rise up before your eyes in these grids. You can see the distribution of the remains. And suddenly you get an idea of, okay, we found a vertebral body here, here, here. This is where we found the tooth. We may have found a hand bone, a bone from the hand that's over here. And suddenly you begin to understand, well, maybe she was in this position as they burned her body and rendered it down. It's very, very painstaking work. This is not something that is done just, leisurely in an afternoon. It's very, very intensive. And here's the really tough thing. When you're talking about fire-related cases, these are some of the most difficult recoveries to do, because when you begin to look at everything at these scenes, everything looks the same because it's all been exposed to heat. And now, after the fact, not only do you have these items that have all been exposed to heat, Now, over the passage of time, you've got dirt deposition that's come on top. You've got plant growth that's come on top, and any kind of impact. Remember, I talked about the term taphonomy earlier, where water has flowed over an area. That's going to come into play too. It is highly complex. And if you're not there with your A game, you're going to lose and miss things.
All of this work combines, Joe, to bring hopefully some closure to Tara Grinstead's mother and her family and friends. Bo Dukes is in prison, convicted for his participation in this. Ryan Duke is currently standing trial for the murder of Tara Grinstead. We do pray that closure in this case does bring some comfort to the families.
I've never been able to understand if closure is a real thing in homicide cases for families, but I do know this, that after almost 2 decades of pure hell that this family has endured, hopefully, they're going to finally find peace. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This Sunday, iHeartRadio brings you live to Levi's Stadium in Santa Clara for the Super Bowl 60 tailgate concert, presented by NetApp. It's the ultimate pregame party, featuring an exclusive performance from Teddy Swims. Your front row experience will be on iHeartRadio stations across the country and the free iHeartRadio app this Sunday at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Then, after the concert, tune in to the Super Bowl 60 pregame show on NBC.
Running my small business was like playing basketball 5-on-1, and I was the one. Now, QuickBooks gives me access to a team of AI agents and trusted experts for the assists I need. Nothing but net.
Outdo it with Intuit QuickBooks. Feature availability varies by product.
Are you a fraud-paying American? 1 in 4 tax-paying Americans has been a victim of identity fraud. With LifeLock, if your identity is stolen, they fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Last year, billions in refunds were stolen. Could be from your salary, overtime, or second job. Gone. But this year, you don't need to stay a victim, because this tax season, fraud-paying American is something no American should have to claim. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/iHeart. Terms apply.
Owning a home is full of surprises. Some wonderful, some not so much. And when something breaks, it can feel like the whole day unravels. That's why HomeServe exists. For as little as $4.99 a month, you'll always have someone to call. A trusted professional ready to help, bringing peace of mind to 4.5 million homeowners nationwide. For plans starting at just $4.99 a month, go to homeserve.com. That's homeserve.com. Not available everywhere. Most plans range between $4.99 to $11.99 a month your first year. Terms apply on covered repairs.
Picture chicken nuggets in your head. Okay, now forget them. Because Taco Bell's crispy chicken nuggets are here. And they're nothing like the nuggets you know. All white meat chicken, coated in tortilla chips for that signature Taco Bell crunch. A nugget like that calls for a sauce that can keep up. Introducing Hidden Valley Diablo Ranch. The iconic ranch you love, fired up with Taco Bell Diablo sauce. Bold meets bolder. Ranch meets Diablo, and it works. Crispy chicken nuggets from Taco Bell, a brand new classic. At participating U.S. Taco Bell locations for a limited time only, while supplies last.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.